The kingdom of my divine will, in the midst of creatures. Book of Heaven, Volume 34, Part 4. June 14th, 1936. God and His Will. His will in relationship with creation. His will in relationship with the celestial beings. His will in disaccord with the human family. The divine volition, with powerful strength, calls me into the interminable sea of its will. And oh, how well one feels in it! How many surprises! How many beautiful things one comprehends, which produce infinite joys, divine lives, love that never says enough. But what makes one the happiest is to see and feel that everything is divine will. The whole of creation forms one single act of supreme volition. But while my mind was wandering within it, sweet Jesus, making me his short little visit, with an unspeakable love, told me, "Blessed daughter of my will, you must know that at the head of the kingdom of my divine will, there is God himself. Our divinity does nothing other than a continuous act of it. We never do the will of anyone, but always our own. The crown of our attributes are dominated by our fiat. Its kingdom is inside of us and extends outside of us in our immensity, in our love, power, and goodness, in everything. Hence, for us, everything is our will. In the second place comes the creation, heavens, suns, stars, winds, waters, and even the little blade of grass. They do nothing other than a continuous act of the fiat. Between the created things and us, there is a respiratory act. We emit the breath of our will, and the creation receives it. And emitting it again, it gives us the breath we have given to it. That is, all the effects that our will, breathed by it, has produced. And it unites with our one and single act. How much glory and honor do we not receive? How extolled is our Supreme Being, only because we let our will be breathed by all creation, and it gives us back the breath we gave it. There is such unity of will with all creation, that everything that comes out of it, or enters into it, forms one single act of supreme will. And the multiplicity and diversity of the things that can be seen and take place are nothing other than the effects that our one and single act produces. In fact, our fiat never changes, nor is it subject to mutating. All of its power lies precisely in this: to do one single act in order to produce all possible and imaginable effects. In the third place come all the angels, saints, and blessed of the celestial fatherland. They revolve around our Supreme Being, and they breathe the strength, the sanctity, the love, the infinite joys, the innumerable happinesses, of the divine volition. They form one single life with it. They feel this life inside as their own life, and they feel it outside, bringing them the ocean ever new of divine happinesses. But one is the act that is formed in heaven, divine will. One is the breath. Only one thing is wanted, divine will. If, God forbid, even just one act or one breath alone could enter heaven, which is not divine will, the celestial fatherland would lose the whole enchantment, the beauty, the awe with which it is invested. But this can never be. See, then, how all the supremacy is held by my Fiat. The blessed, by just merely breathing it, remain filled with seas of joys and incomprehensible happiness. And as they emit the breath, our divinity feels the happiness that all the saints enjoy. And we all magnify our supreme volition as the beginning, font, and origin of all goods. In the fourth place comes the human family. It revolves around us, but since their will is not one with ours, they do not breathe our volition that establishes the order, the sanctity, the union, the harmony with their Creator. And because of this, they remain scattered, disordered, and as though lost, away from us. They are unhappy beings. The peace, the happiness, the abundance of goods is far from them, and all the evil comes from the fact that our will is not theirs. We do not breathe each other, and this hinders the communication of our goods, the perfect union with our Supreme Being. Our creative hand, which was to form its masterpiece, and the most beautiful one in each creature, is stopped because our will is missing. It does not find their souls as suitable, adaptable, in order to render our divine art doable. Wherever our will is lacking, we do not know what to do with that creature. Here is the reason why we so long for our divine will to reign and form its life in them. Because our creative work is hampered, our work suspended. The work of creation is incomplete. And in order to obtain this, one must be the will of heaven and of the earth, one the life, one the love, one the breath. And this is the greatest love we have for the creatures. We still have many beautiful works to do, but the human will hinders our step, binds our arms, and renders our creative hands inoperative. Therefore, one who wants to do our will and live in it gives us work to do, and we make of her whatever we want. Now you must know that as the creature decides to live of divine will, she secures her salvation and her sanctity. We dwell in her as in our home, and her will serves us as material, by which, in each of her acts, we pronounce the Fiat, in order to form our works worthy of the one who inhabits her. We act like a king who makes use of stones, tuff, bricks, and lime, in order to form for himself a sumptuous royal palace, such as to leave the whole world astounded. If he did not have the stones, the necessary material to build his palace, poor king, in spite of all the goodwill he might have and money to spend for the edifice, yet, lacking the raw material, he would remain without his royal palace. So are we. If we do not have the will of the soul, with all our power and will that we have, lacking the material, we cannot form in the soul the beautiful royal residence worthy of our dwelling. Therefore, when the creature gives us her will and takes ours, we are safe. We find everything at our disposal, small things and big things, natural things and spiritual things. Everything is ours, and we make use of everything in order to let our omnipotent Fiat operate. And since our will cannot be without its works, it recalls all of its works into the royal residence it has formed with so much love in the creature. It surrounds itself with all the works of creation, heavens, sun, and stars pay it homage, and it places in order within her everything I did in redemption, my life, my birth, my baby tears, my pains and prayers, everything. Wherever my will is present, nothing must be missing, because everything came out of it. Everything belongs to it by right, and therefore, wherever it reigns, it forms the centralization of all its works. And oh, the beauties, the order, the harmony, the divine goods that can be seen in this creature. The heavens are stupefied, and all admire the love and power of the divine will, and trembling, they adore it. So then, let yourself be worked by it, and it will do great things as to leave you astounded. Moreover, our love and our eternal wisdom have established all the graces that we must give to the creature, the degrees of sanctity she must acquire, the beauty with which we must pearl her, the love with which she must love us, and the very acts she must do. Wherever our Fiat reigns, everything is realized. The divine order is in full vigor. Not a single comma is misplaced. Our operating is in full harmony with the works of the creature. And oh, how we delight! And once we have given her our final love in time, and she has fulfilled our final act of divine will in her mortal life, then our love will make her fly to the celestial fatherland, and our will shall receive her in heaven as triumph of its operating and conquering will, which with so much love it conquered on earth. Hence, Her final act will be the entrance she will make into heaven, to then begin, in our will, bearer of happiness, which will have no end. On the other hand, there, where our volition does not reign, the divine order does not exist. How many works broken and not fulfilled! How many divine voids may be filled with passions, with sins! There is no beauty, but such deformity as to arouse pity. Therefore be attentive, and let our will reign and live in you. Fiat. July 4th, 1936. How an act of the human will can spoil the divine order and its most beautiful works. The first thing that God wants is absolute freedom. How the divine will shall form many Jesuses wherever it reigns. My poor mind cannot be without going around and flying in the divine volition. And my poor human will feels as though under the pressure of the divine will. And I thought to myself, ah, yes, it is beautiful. One feels the victory, the triumph, the dominion, the happiness, the beautiful conquests of the living in the divine volition. But the human will, while it feels alive, must die continuously. It is true that it is the greatest honor, the greatest love of God, his deigning to descend into the will of the creature, and with his majesty and power operate and do whatever he wants, while the human remains in its place. It can only do what God does. But it must stop anything of its own. This is the sacrifice of sacrifices, especially in certain circumstances. Oh, how painful it is to feel one's own life and to keep it as if one did not have it. Because the divine fiat does not tolerate even one fiber of the human will to act in its will. And a crowd of thoughts kept crowding my poor mind. And my sweet Jesus, compassionating my ignorance and the painful state I was in, with unspeakable tenderness, placing his most holy hand upon my head, told me, "Blessed daughter, courage, do not lose heart. My divine volition wants everything, because it knows that even just one small act, one desire, or one fiber of the human will would spoil its most beautiful works, the divine order. Its sanctity would remain hampered, its love restricted, its power limited. This is why it does not tolerate even just one fiber of the human will to keep its life. It is true that this is the sacrifice of sacrifices. No other sacrifice can equal the weight, the value, the intensity of the sacrifice of living without a will. So much so that it takes the perennial life, the continuous miracle of my divine volition, in order to be able to endure this sacrifice, which is such that, in the face of it, other sacrifices can be called shadows, pictures, paintings, or a game for children who cry for nothing. In fact, there is the human will, which in the pains, in the sorrowful encounters, or in the works, does not feel undone, without life, without satisfactions. Therefore the sacrifices are felt. How much lighter, but emptied of God, of sanctity, of love, of light, of true happiness, and perhaps not even exempt of sins, because the human will without mine can never do good and holy things. Besides, if my fiat did not have the virtue of keeping the human will with itself without giving it life, but rather enclosing its life within it, so that it would not be able to find either the place or the time to be able to act, it would not be able to operate with that lavishness, opulence, and divine pomp which we are used to displaying in our works. If in creation there had been another will, it would have prevented us from using the sumptuousness, magnificence, and divine pomp we had in the whole creation. It could have hindered the expanse of the heavens, the multiplicity of the stars, the vastness of the light of the sun, the variety of so many created things. It would have set a limit before us. This is why our will wants to be alone, in order to do what it can do and wants to do. And therefore it wants the human will with itself, concurring as spectator and admirer of what it wants to do in it. But it must be convinced, if it wants to live in my will, that its will cannot act, but must serve to enclose mine in it, to let it do its works with all freedom, with all the sumptuousness, with the opulence of grace, and with the pomp of its divine varieties. The first thing we want is absolute freedom. We want to be free, my daughter, whatever the sacrifice might be that we ask, or the works that we want to do. If it were not so, the living in my will would be a way of speaking, but would not exist in reality. Dear Jesus became silent, and I kept thinking of all that Jesus had told me. And I said to myself, he is right that the human will cannot act before the sanctity and power of his will. Of its own, it already puts itself in its place of nothingness. It takes too much to act in the face of a will that is divine. It feels incapable, and by itself would pray the divine not to give it the great misfortune of letting it form even a single motion or a fiber of its own will. But my cross, and you know what a maze you put me into. I feel hampered and humiliated unto dust, being in need of you know who, without being able to help myself, and not for one day or one year. Oh, how hard this is. I know that only your will gives me the strength, the grace, for by myself I could not have endured. And I felt such bitterness as to feel myself dying. And my always lovable Jesus, compassionating me, continued, my daughter, when my divine will wants to do a fulfilled act in the creature, and do you know what a fulfilled act of my will means? It means a complete act of God, in which he encloses sanctity, beauty, love, power, and light, such as to leave heaven and earth astounded. God himself must feel enraptured, but so much as to form his dwelling, his throne of glory in this his complete act, which will serve him, and will descend like beneficial dew for the good of all creatures. Well then, in order to do this fulfilled act, I had to dispose a new cross upon you, given to no one else, in order to mature you, and make arise in you the dispositions that were needed for you to receive, and for God to do this, his fulfilled act of his will. With nothing one can do nothing. Therefore, in order for you to receive, and for us to give, we had to dispose new crosses, which, united to the continuous crafting of our will, would prepare everything for an act so great. You must know that my fiat has never left you, and this is why you feel its sweet impression, and ruling over each fiber, motion, and desire of your will, jealous of you and of its own fulfilled act it wanted to do, it kept and maintained its royal dominion. But do you know why? Here is a sweet and dear secret. Listen to me. As my will dominated your mind, your gaze, your word, so did it form your Jesus in your mind, his gaze in yours, his word in yours. As it dominated your fibers, motion, and heart, so did it form his fibers, the motion, and the heart of your Jesus in you. And as it dominated over your works, steps, and your entire being, so did it form his works, his steps, the whole of Jesus within you. Now, if my will had given you the freedom to let yours act, even in the smallest and most innocent things, it would not have been able to form your Jesus in you. And I cannot, nor do I want to live of a human will. Nor would my volition have taken on the commitment of forming me in your soul, had it not been certain that I would find my own will, which animated my own humanity. Its kingdom on earth will be precisely this: to form as many Jesuses for as many creatures as want to live of divine will. With Jesus in the souls, its kingdom will have its sumptuousness, sublimeness, and its opulence of things unheard of, and it will be secured. Then, in the kingdom of my divine fiat, will I have as many living Jesuses that love me, glorify me, and will give me complete glory. This is why I so much long for this kingdom, and you too long for it, and occupy yourself with nothing else. Let me do. Trust me, and I will take care of everything. After this, I continued to think of the divine will, and my sweet Jesus added, "My daughter, the light, symbol of my divine will, the very nature of it, is to spread as much as it can, and whomever finds it, it denies its light to no one, whether they want it or not. At the most, it may happen that those who want the light make use of it, and may use it in order to do even great works, while those who do not want it do not do any good, but still cannot deny that they have received the good of the light. Such is my will. More than light, it expands everywhere. It invests everyone and everything. And the sign that the soul possesses it is her feeling the need, together with it, to give herself to all, to do good to all. With her act she runs to all and would want to make as many Jesuses in order to give him to each one. My will belongs to all. I am the Jesus of all, and therefore only then am I content, when the creature makes my will, my life, her own, and wants to give me to everyone. She is my joy and my continuous feast. Fiat. You have reached the end of the Book of Heaven, Volume 34, Part 4. Fiat.